All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Ambient meeting. The first thing on the agenda, not surprising, it's the long-awaited Aussie policy. Is there any update on that?
I am working on the doc right now, but it's not quite ready yet. Didn't have to punch it. Sorry.
So, Louis, I think your voice is not super clear. I think you said you are working on the doc. Do you have any estimation of when it might be good for you to podcast to be able to share with the community?
Yeah, next week.
Next week? Okay, I missed that. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Next week is Thanksgiving week.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, Wednesday. Well, how many of you are going to still be here? I think it really depends.
Well, I won't be.
Okay.
Well, I'll send it out. I'll certainly put it in the TOC Slack channel by the end of the week. And I can probably put it in the Ambient Dev channel too.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, because I know a lot of people are asking. I just want to make sure, we have some progress towards that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's do a quick ask about who's going to be on vacation next Wednesday. Because if a lot of people are on vacation, we should just go ahead and mark the call cancel. So raise your hand if you're going to be on vacation. All right, sounds like a bunch of folks. All right, I'm convinced. No meeting. Thank you. All right, the next thing we have, John, did you want to add anything for the Aussie policy before we move up to Mitch?
No.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Mitch, over to you to discuss about CNI integration. Do we have Mitch? Okay, maybe we don't have Mitch. All right. Ian, why don't you take us through the ambient revision label proposal?
Looks like Mike has a hand raised.
Oh, Mike, go ahead. Is your hand raised about Thanksgiving? Sorry, I apologize.
Sorry, that was for Thanksgiving.
Okay, I was trying to take notes, so I didn't mean to ignore you. By the way, welcome you to the Israel community. We're so excited to have you. So,
thanks, glad to be here.
Yeah. All right, Ian, why don't you take us through the proposal?
Sure. Do you want to click and share, or do you want me to share?
Actually, why don't you share? Because I'm just taking some notes, making sure I will capture.
Alrighty. Let me get that working. All right. It looks pretty visible for folks.
Yep, it's good.
All right. Cool. So we've been working a little bit with how revisions interact with Ambient, and it's come up that the Istio.io revision label, which currently controls the revision that you're trying to use, but also forces a sidecar injection, isn't super ideal. And so we'd like to begin a discussion about how this user experience could be made a little bit better for folks. right now, the use case that we have in mind is using the revision label to manage how your waypoints are going to be controlled in an ambient deployment. So yeah, a brief overview of the current behavior. Basically, when you specify a revision, that also instructs that you want to have sidecars injected. We do have an Istio analyzer message that advises people not to use the Istio injection label if they're already using the revision label. So yeah, if you want to have a revision label that controls how your waypoints are going to behave, you must specify the revision. Then you must specify that you do not want to inject, and then add the data plane mode ambient. So it's kind of clunky, but there is at least a way to work with it for the time being. Yeah, essentially, we'd like to go ahead and resolve this, make this experience a little bit better, and came up with a few ideas. One is we do nothing; it just stays the same. You deal with it. There's 3 labels to get the desired behavior. We could work on a new label that's something like Istio revision, no side effects, and start encouraging the use of this new label while maintaining the old label and the old behavior for backward compatibility. We can create a new label that basically does nothing to sidecars. It's ambient only, but a sort of similar concept. Looking at messages come in. Sorry. So we could basically have the Istio revision label mean something slightly different if ambient is enabled from if ambient isn't. And then we could work over time to just revise the meaning of the existing revision label so that it's basically clean.
Your custom, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, I see one option is missing here, which is F, use gateway class or standard gateway stuff that is not specific to Ambient but for any gateway, since waypoints, if you're specifically about waypoints, which are implemented using Kubernetes gateway, any solution should work for gateways that are implemented using gateway. I mean, all kind of gateways that we support, ingress gateway, east-west gateway, and all the other stuff that are using the Kubernetes gateway API should probably use the same solution, and it's not specific to waypoints in any way. And the gateway class and all the other standard specification in gateway, which maybe is a version, maybe something else, which hopefully are used by other vendors as well, would probably be better than any Istio.io label.
So is that already standardized in the gateway API right now to allow the ingress gateway to be able to configure which revision? Because this is a kind of a pretty urgent problem we need to solve before Ambient goes to beta. I don't know if I would feel comfortable to rely on something that's not a standard yet. You know what I mean?
We the only thing that is standard as far as I know is to have a gateway class. The gateway class, I think we discussed in the past this exactly the same topic in the context of gateways, not Istio. John, do you remember the context? I think one of the proposals was to use Istio.io, the class name to be Istio/revision to indicate a particular version, and there are some other proposals. But using the gateway class object itself, it's whatever syntax we choose, I think is viable, and it was not rejected, just we didn't implement it. John?
So
yeah, I would say it was considered an option. I think we at the time decided that for now we would just stick with using the revision label because it already existed and solved the same use cases. I'm not sure why. I think there's something missing from this proposal. Well, I think the do nothing option is being downplayed a bit too much. Like, you can already put the label just on the gateway object, not the namespace label. Why is that not sufficient? Right? You don't even need it to be user facing already. It's part of istio waypoint create -- revision already. Users don't even have to know that a label exists or anything. It's kind of an implementation detail. I do get that maybe you don't want the person creating the waypoint to pick the revision. You want the namespace to do it. So I can see that there are use cases. But the option A doesn't seem so bad to me.
So the only thing about option A, I agree, it's not so bad. It actually works, which is the most important thing. The only thing about option A is potential confusing, right? If you need to config, so first of all, in the sidecar world, when you use istio.io/rev, you have two meaning, right? One meaning is this is my Istio decontrol plane I'm pointing to, which is very straightforward, that meaning. The other meaning is also, hey, go ahead and inject a sidecar for me, which that meaning no longer apply in the context of waypoint.
Or it has one meaning.
Right.
It means inject the workloads with this revision. Right? It's one
I
declaration.
would say the meaning is that this is the Istio revision that should be used for this workload. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to inject something. I mean, we just happen to implement injection using a label selector, which we could have done whatever else, but that's implementation detail. It doesn't mean that you must inject something or do something about it.
That is true, but I feel like we can't change it at this point, right?
I agree.
Yeah. The backwards compatibility considerations with the webhook labels is also really, really, really tricky. You can go back.
Yeah, I don't want to change anything on the sidecar. I totally agree. Like any of these designs, if it touches sidecar, I'm not a big fan of it because we have thousands of users in production, right? Yeah.
And I would also say namespace, touching the namespace label is also something that we should avoid. So it has to be something with a gateway object that is being created because that's really the unit of control.
So the only place that conflict exists is where Costin is talking about at the namespace. If you label a waypoint gateway or an ingress gateway, it's very clear that that gateway should not be injected. It doesn't get a sidecar associated with it as it spins up. If, on the other hand, you label a workload, say a deployment or a pod, it's very clear that that's not a waypoint and that needs to have a sidecar injected. So the only place that we have the conflict is on the namespace. And it seems to me that if your namespace has data plane mode ambient and an istio.io rev label, it would be reasonable not to inject any sidecars in that namespace.
Which is option D, revise the meaning of istio.io/rev if ambient is enabled.
Oh, it's not really, because if you specify istio.io rev on the namespace, it means you want istio sidecars and there is no ambient. That it should be excluded from ambient. So it's not necessarily. You put istio.io rev, you mean sidecars.
Well, so we're already using istio.io rev for waypoints.
But not on namespace. So istio.io rev on a namespace
and on waypoints today. We could simply remove namespace support. That makes migration a little bit more complicated. If you've labeled your namespace with a rev and are now trying to migrate, you've got some label changes to make. It's not terrible, but it's not super smooth. However,
yeah, I'm not sure if we can remove it though, because that means that for every single workload within the namespace, you have to label with istio.io/rev.
No, Lynn, we wouldn't need to label the workloads, just the waypoint. However, I agree with you that I think we probably can find a better solution than that. And that would be, if you have a namespace, this might be, like you said, option D. If your namespace is labeled with istio.io rev already, and you add the label data plane mode equals ambient, we now know that your data plane mode is not sidecar. So we stop injecting sidecars in that namespace because of the ambient label.
No way. You are going to break sidecars and existing users without any. I mean, why would you? I mean, istio.io rev means I want sidecars. You put another one, say I don't want sidecars.
That's my worry about. And also, Mitch, if you remember, when we implemented the logic, the sidecar injection logic actually wins over ambient for backwards compatible. So in the code, like Istio injection wins over data plane mode equals ambient.
I don't know what you mean by wins over at this point.
Like if the pod has both label on the namespace, Istio IO/rev or Istio injection and data plane mode ambient, the data plane mode ambient is lowest on the priority as far as whether the namespace is truly, ambient or not.
Okay, that seems like behavior we should be able to change. We don't support running sidecar mode with ambient today, so we've not really published any API specification on that. If that's the behavior today, it seems like something we can correct.
I don't think we want to change it. We purposefully designed that way so that you could gradually move from sidecar to ambient whenever you are ready and whenever Istio is ready for you, right? So,
sure. Labeling your namespace signals that you're ready, doesn't it?
How about
namespace as ambient mode? That means you want your namespace to be an ambient mode, doesn't it?
Before we get too much into this discussion about how we migrate, let's focus about what is the desired state, end state, and what the user should see at the end of the day. I mean, assuming they migrated, assuming that so my understanding is that we want ambient to be a CNI level enabled by default. They don't have to go on individual namespaces. And we want waypoints to be configured whenever they choose with a gateway API. So for this part, for the point of view of waypoints, I think it's a very, very narrow discussion. It's either we use gateway class or use the EQRF on the gateway, because any gateway should be consistently configured. Not, waypoints are not, don't use a different API. So for the waypoint, I think we can close the discussion very, very simply, either by keeping what we have right now, ignoring all the namespace label and everything else, because the gateway is not injected, doesn't have anything to do with that. Or by using gateway class, which is, again, we can do it later. It's not necessarily we have to do it now. Yeah. And for migration, we can discuss it separately. That's a different topic than waypoint. We don't need to mix them.
I don't know why we remove support.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Lynn. I don't know why we would remove support for the revision label at the namespace as you go from sidecar to ambient. We've supported that for some time. It's a pretty intuitive thing. You can either apply the label at the namespace and it applies to everything within the namespace, or you apply it at the waypoint level. I don't see why we would remove that from the API.
But it was never in the API. Gateway object, whatever labels they have, gateway is not injected. We don't inject anything as a gateway.
But revision isn't about injection. It's about mapping to a control plane, right? It's about saying, I want this namespace to be using, say, the stable version of Istio. You can use that as a namespace level.
Sure, but gateway already have a different way to do it. I mean, why would we?
So the labels have always been supported at the namespace level and at the workload level. In ambient, our workload becomes a waypoint gateway. So we now support it at the waypoint and at the namespace level, just like we have always before.
So a few things, right? Like obviously we can separate the waypoint discussion a little bit from the non-waypoint ambient use case discussion, right? The Z-tunnel only discussion. You can't rely on the waypoint to indicate what control plane revision the L4 data plane is using.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so we're in agreement with that. The namespace label, right, can act as a defaulting mechanism for like what you want, where it's going to apply, right? And it means workloads, it means everything in here is what it means. And Mitch is right, it means use, right? Ambient mode enabled means use ambient, and then the revision says use this control plane for this scope, right? They have pretty clear meaning. It seems like the hang up is what we mean in the non-waypoint case.
For the current state, like revision has no relevance in the non-waypoint case. We ignore it all
today. Right, but at some point down the line, we might actually have the ability to support more than one control plane live.
I think the
We don't-
ztunnel
we don't-
revision
we don't-
support is added too, right? Right now you can install ztunnel with different revision, which I would expect that revision come from your namespace.
No, that does not work today.
Yeah, because ztunnels are node specific. It can't, right? It has to come from the node.
Oh, okay. Okay, never mind. It's at the installation time. My bad. Yeah.
So revision for ambient for L4 and revision for waypoint is completely decoupled. I mean,
Yes, they are. I agree. They are entirely orthogonal custom. Yes, that is correct. So if we're only talking about waypoint, right? If this is all that this is about, and not enrollment, right, which is a separate thing. We have two labels, right? Enrollment, right? Which form of mesh is on for these workloads, and then revision, which is which control plane is going to be used for the moving parts mesh. I tend to agree with Mitch, right? The ambient mode enabled is additive, right? It's a new thing. It's better to actually make it probably supersede than subsede. Right, because it's the mechanism by which you turn on the migration. And asking people to remove one and add the other, right, we know it's just an induced churn. Right, because you'll remove the sidecars, things will break, then you'll add ambient back, things will start working again. And why did we do that to you?
But then Louis, let me take you and Mitch through the thinking we had, right? So let's say you have a namespace. The namespace is marked as istio.io/rev, right? To point to a particular control plane, and you have sidecar running with all the pods within your namespace, right? So you're a perfect Istio user, you use revision. Now, you move to the next new Istio that has ambient support. You might already enable ambient, right? So when you are ready to move your namespace to ambient, we don't want you to just go there and mark data plane mode ambient, right? Because we don't want to move your workload to ambient at this moment because you still have your sidecar, right? We would only want to move your workload to ambient after you remove the sidecar. So you have a little bit more control.
Why is that 2 operations instead of 1? Why do I have to remove, right? You're going to tell me remove sidecar, restart my pod, and then go back in and turn ambient mode on.
You don't have to do it in that order. With the way it is now, you could say, I want this namespace to be ambient for, and it's implied for anything that doesn't have a sidecar right now. And then you go through and you add, you know, sidecar.istio.io inject false, I guess it is, or disabled, I'm not sure. And then when that deployment restarts, it comes up ambient. You're running in a mixed mode at that point.
Right. Any UX which is, you know, the way that you get the effect that you want is by saying, I want not the effects that I already have, or is it confusing UX?
I think if we could boil down what I've proposed here to data plane mode equals ambient implies injection equals false. When you turn one on, you have turned the other off.
Right, so supersedes.
Yes.
Right, I perform one additive operation and I run a rolling restart.
Yeah, my worry is what if you did that label, you didn't go there to do rolling restart, right? Then what behavior you're going to see, having your sidecar participate in ambient, having ztunnel redirect everything?
That should just continue to work, right? If you can have a mesh in which some workloads have a sidecar and some workloads have the ztunnel, then there shouldn't theoretically be a problem with a workload that has a sidecar that sits on top of ztunnel. It's not an architecture that I would advocate for in the long run, but it should not break your traffic. And then the next time that pod restarts or that workload restarts, the sidecar goes away and you have the ideal architecture for an ambient user.
So first of all, again, we keep discussing migration instead of waypoint, which was actually what the topic was supposed to be about. And second, I have a very strong objection to modifying V1 stable semantics. I mean, anything that is stable and used by users and is clearly defined, it should not be post factum modified for, especially for beta features. I mean, if ambient is V1, then you can discuss whatever, but Istio ref is one of the most stable thing in Istio, and we should not, you put some beta or it's a disaster. It's going to hurt users. I don't know why we're spending time discussing.
Yeah, no. We're not discussing changing semantic of istio.io/rev. What Mitch and Louis are trying to say is our default behavior in ambient, the semantics of data plane mode equals ambient, the right behavior for our user. Do we cause more operation complexity with the current behavior, right? That we still have room to change because that's only alpha at the moment.
So, but that's for L4, not for waypoints.
Yeah, no. Like there's not a lot of controversy about waypoints, Custom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So
We can put
L4,
the revision label on the gateway is fine. Put the revision label on the namespace and inherit is fine. Put the revision label as the default, right, and not put the revision on the gateway class is also fine.
Yeah. So I think for waypoint, just to wrap this up discussion for waypoint, I think we're okay. We can continue use istio.io/rev to indicate whichever control plane is point to, and we can continue use label. And when the gateway supports that, we could potentially add that support too. But there's no debates on this. Is that
and what debate do we have for L4? Because it's clear that it's per node, so namespace rev doesn't have any relevance since each node has
Yeah, the only thing we're debating is the enablement semantics, not which revision.
Okay, so what we have seems to be working. No, I mean, you put Istio data mode ambient and it enables L4. What's controversial?
Right. So the only thing controversial is if you have both sidecar inject equals true and data mode ambient equals true, what happens?
You have sidecar injection on by default because that's a stable behavior, and if you don't want it, you remove it. It's clear.
So Costin, we can't change that behavior between beta and GA. If we want the label to mean supersede, we should do that now. And then the question is, which yields a better UX?
Supersede, it's basically changing the semantics of Istio with sidecars and modifying its behavior after it's V1. I mean, saying that it's
it's not. If you add, we're adding a feature custom. We're not changing the semantics of an existing feature. The only situation, right? Ambient and sidecar is a choice. There has to be an API that indicates how the choice is resolved in context. You can choose. The answer can be, look, if you have inject equals true and data plane mode equals ambient equals true, then sidecar wins, right? Or you could choose that ambient wins. You have to pick one.
Yes,
right?
But so if the purpose is migration, which I suppose it is, if you alter the behavior, that means users who were previously using sidecars will be broken because they restart their workload.
The only reason that an existing user would be broken, Costin, is if for some reason they had data plane mode equals ambient on their namespace before ambient existed, and they didn't actually want ambient.
No, if they use any feature of Istio that is not supported by ambient and it requires sidecars, and someone sets this ambient on the namespace because they have some workloads that use ambient, but one workload that's using sidecar is restarted. Suddenly you no longer have sidecar, your security is broken because you are using some feature that is not.
Yes,
that's exactly why we designed this way in the first place, by the way, because you really have to manual testing it to make sure moving to ambient doesn't break you.
Yeah, and otherwise you have to change each individual application as using sidecar to specify, hey, I still want to use sidecar because I need it.
Okay, custom, but just remember, like, putting data mode equals ambient on a workload or a namespace means I'm explicitly choosing to enroll.
For a workload, yes. For a namespace, I don't think so. I mean, it means that I want to enroll in L4. I want the namespace to have L4 enabled, but that doesn't mean I want to remove the sidecars for all the workload at once from the entire.
No, that's literally what it can mean. And for migration, right? Like they chose to do it.
I think we can. I think
choose to remove security. I mean, I
think we can route around this problem. Right now, it sounds like the data plane mode ambient label is only allowed at the namespace layer. If we also allow it at the workload layer, then you have the ability to migrate all of your workloads, one workload at a time in a namespace over onto Ambient L4, or you can do it at the namespace layer. At any layer you do it, if you do it to a workload that is not ready, that is using features that don't work in Ambient, that feature will break, or that workload will break. That's what a migration looks like.
Right. Like we have to enable migration. There are feature differences. We document the feature differences. If you choose to migrate and you're susceptible to a feature variation, you're going to have a thing that you need to test.
But
Like we work very hard.
we support enable ambient on a workload. It's just not in a standard API. It's either in a annotation or environment variable. I forgot, but there is an option to do that.
Yeah, we're just not using a label yet.
Mm-hmm. Sanjeev.
Yeah, I tend to kind of agree with what Lynn and Costin are saying, that just adding a name ambient label really shouldn't clobber existing workloads. It's more for setting up that namespace for future workloads, and having users explicitly remove the sidecar label whenever they're good and ready to remove that. But it shouldn't really, we are essentially giving priority to a beta feature over an existing stable feature that's been running for years. So it seems to me, at least my personal opinion, that the current logic is pretty good.
I'm okay with changing the precedence, right? Keeping the precedence the way it is, right? You can tell people, look, okay, to move away from sidecars, you have to move istio inject equals true, but you have to have made sure you set a data ambient equals true at the same time. The one thing you don't want users to do is remove sidecars, have a rolling restart, and then enable ambient again. Because that will also break them.
Yep.
But I just to be clear, that users can still be broken even if we maintain the precedents that exist today. A user can still shoot themselves in the foot. So, like, I actually think that we're by stating so openly that we're saving users, I actually don't think we are. Because just because we give an extra step doesn't mean we're giving them the tools to make sure that their data plane functions the way they expect. We're putting one extra barrier in the path, but that's it.
What do you mean they'll be broken? I mean, with this model,
Like,
they're not broken
because
at
you're
all.
saying that they have to explicitly decide to move away from sidecars, right? That's the only difference here, is that the user has to explicitly move their data plane away from sidecars. But the truth is that there needs to be tooling to say, hey, this thing that you're doing will not work in ambient. And that's the real missing piece, is it's like a user needs to even be aware of that. So saying that we're going to break their data plane is really in my opinion, the orthogonal piece, because we need to make sure that users are even aware of that, whether the step is
Right, so
purposeful. Yeah.
The classic example there is you have an authorization policy and you do not have a waypoint yet, and you switch.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is you can do that switch whether or not we change these label semantics. It's just a matter of when.
I don't know if you follow the discussion or the Twitter or the trader, or I mean, I think where they actually want to have sidecar. I mean, it's not only if you could remove the sidecar, but maybe you want to use sidecar for whatever reason. It's not. Yeah, you could have tools. It's wonderful to have tools to detect you can move to safely to ambient, but you can put a new version of V3 with traffic splitting 0, deploy it, see how it works, and shift traffic to the new version that doesn't have a sidecar. Do the proper stuff with Argo or whatever you are using. So you do have a safe way to do any kind of configuration change or whatever change. But it has to be opt-in and it has to be tested. I mean, you need to test first before you move.
But that safety doesn't really change whether you have to change 2 labels or 1.
Right. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you're putting a door in front of what remains a question mark. So whether or not, like, yes, I understand what you're saying, but then if the user already knows that those should still be sidecars, then they should mark those workloads as specifically sidecars. The fact that there's an extra blocker doesn't make the data plane any safer or the upgrade any safer. As Mitch was saying, I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be sort of the same amount of work for the users, right? Like today, what you would do if you wanted to trickle over, like Costin was saying, right? You would set up a namespace that has a revision or injection enabled. You would put data plane mode on, and then you would make your V3 deployment and have it not get sidecar injection. All right, now you've got your first ambient thing. You can roll through trickling traffic around that way and migrate everything, right? And at the end, all of your deployments are spinning up pods that have sidecar disabled. And then you've got cleanup. The alternative would be, we just completely flip that on its head. It works the other way. You go up front and add, I want sidecars to everything. Then you can turn on ambient, and then you can start removing that over time. But I think either way, it's kind of the same number of operations.
Where do we have a sense for where users mostly specify sidecar inject equals true? On the namespace or the workload?
Namespace.
Namespace
I
most of
think.
the time.
Probably namespace. That'd be my guess.
Right. So that indicates that people will do migration to ambient at the namespace level.
No, it indicates that crazy people will do migration at namespace level without testing. I mean, if they want to break the production,
Costin, crazy people did a migration to Istio at the namespace level by definition, given what we just heard.
maybe, but that doesn't make it right. I mean,
Yes, but it's what they're doing, right? And like meet the user where they are.
I think when they feel comfortable with ambient, they will want to do it at the namespace level.
Sure.
But initially, maybe pod.
Yeah, no, like that's a given, right? And obviously, we have to clearly we have to support per workload enablement cleanly. Like no one's going to argue about that. But in the typical case, once ambient is stable, we clearly expect users to migrate namespace by namespace, because that's what they did to Istio and to sidecars in the first place.
I would say when ambient is stable, we would expect users to migrate, to have the entire cluster enabled with, at CNI level, so L4 will be able everywhere. And then when they do normal release process for their workloads, I mean, with version and so forth, to pick that for the new versions. But I don't expect any workloads that have a sidecar and is working with sidecar to suddenly not have, in that particular version, to not have a sidecar. Because
no, I think that's not what the existing user experience is saying, Kelsey.
Okay,
right,
we can have a mode we can add an option for users who are, wants to don't use Argo, don't use tools, don't care about traffic shifting and safety. Sure, I don't mind having an option to,
okay.
leave dangerous.
So how about this, right? We will support the sidecar inject equals true and ambient data mode equals true, right? On both namespace and workload, like we do today. The workload specified one always wins over the namespace specified one, just like it does today. We leave sidecar inject equals true having precedence. Right? If you want to do per workload, you put sidecar inject equals true on it and you get what you want. If you did it per namespace, because that shows how you chose to migrate, same thing applies. If you want to get rid of sidecars, you remove sidecar inject equals true. So we leave the precedence the way it is right now, which is data mode ambient equals true is subordinate to, not above in terms of precedence. But once you remove it, and there are no labels on any workloads, the whole namespace, when any pod restarts, gets migrated, which is what users seem to want because that's what they did before.
Louis, I do have to throw one wrench in that. I love what you just said, and I wish it was true. Today, namespace injection labels take precedence over workload. That was a mistake made back in Istio 1.2. We tried to fix it, and
really?
Yes,
I didn't know that.
Mitch, that's not
well, hold up. It's not a mistake either. It was done intentionally for backwards compatibility because there used to be no workload labels. there was only
Right.
namespace labels, and so if we said workload takes precedence, then both revisions would inject it. So it's actually the opposite. Namespace takes precedent for again bad reasons, but
Well, is that revision or inject equals true?
it's both.
Because like inject, like
the inject equal false on workload, the annotation, I think it takes precedence. Always said.
No, false. If any of them is false, then it's false.
Yeah.
If they're
that's what
both
we care
true,
about.
then the namespace takes precedence.
Sure. But if you want to not have sidecar enabled on a workload, you put the inject false. You don't.
Oh yeah, that works. Yes.
So it's perfectly fine. I mean, it's just disabled.
yeah, no,
So the false
Okay.
always win, right? Regardless whether it's in the pod level or not.
right. And
Yeah,
same
I
is
had
true
a
for
table of this somewhere. Let me.
I guess data mode equals ambient equals false also therefore wins on the workload level for the same reason.
We have a separate disable label for workloads for ambient, but it functionally does the same thing. Like there's a don't inject ambient for this specific workload. It's a separate label from the data plane mode, but they really could be the same thing, I think.
Okay, that sounds like maybe something to clean up. Okay, so
Ian, it sounds like maybe to move this forward, I think we can do two things. One, workload labeling for ambient needs to become a thing. It sounds like it's like an environment variable or something right now that needs to be cleaned up. Sounds like we have pretty broad agreement on that. It should be possible to opt an individual workload into ambient at L4. The second is, and I'd be happy to work with you on this, let's take at least two options, the do nothing option, and I think it's option D here, and paint a story about what migration looks like, both at the workload level and at the namespace level. I can work with that gosh, the words aren't coming to me, with you on that. Those prepositions are just getting away from me. And then maybe we can represent that in 2 weeks and kind of see what migration would look like with these options.
yeah, I think probably the most useful thing would actually be to have a table for enablement of ambient versus injection for sidecar, and then a separate table for the meaning of revision.
Yep.
Yeah, we need that. Okay, so for this proposal, I think for waypoint, there's no disagreements. So let's maybe take this what we have and start with a new doc for workload, because that's what's the contention, right?
Lynn, where did you feel like we had consensus on waypoint, with A or D?
Oh, okay. I thought everybody had consensus on waypoint, which I actually wrote in the meeting minutes. For waypoint, just use istio.io/rev label to indicate whichever revision the waypoint should point to.
Right.
I'm in favor of that, but I think at least Costin is continuing to object to that.
No, I'm saying waypoint, if it was a waypoint, a gateway object as an istio rev as it is today, like any other gateway, ingress gateway and everything else, it should work. There is no change in the current gateway behavior about istio rev. And if it's that namespace, I don't know if it's true that that istio rev is. John, can you confirm that a label per namespace is impacting the self-created, automatically created istio workloads for the gateway?
Yes.
It is, yeah.
It is? Okay, we can keep it. Whatever exists, the option A is to do nothing with it, to keep the existing behavior stable and not mess with it.
So to clarify,
Yeah, for waypoint is option A. Yeah, go ahead, Stan.
Well, hold on. A is conflating injection and waypoint revisions. We need to cleanly separate the two things in the doc, have the two tables, right? Because we can't just say it's A.
Yeah, I agree. Without istio injection disabled, that has nothing to do with gateway because they're injected. So it has nothing to do with it.
That's what I was about to ask, right? Injection won't
good
happen.
Clarification, yeah.
Injection won't happen for gateways, but because we know they're gateways basically. But for pods, it's a different story. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So let's break the doc and say, L4 data plane and waypoints. Right. Otherwise, yeah, it's just going to be too messy. Like this will not represent the actual agreement.
And Ian, I'll be happy to drive that alongside you. Yeah. Thank you for bringing this up. I think there were some implicit disagreements we didn't know we had, which is always great to get those out before we go to beta.
Yeah, absolutely. And The doc already states this, but it could probably be a little bit clearer. So there's always opportunity there. I know asking users of Istio in the Atlanta area, a lot of people weren't aware what revision did, like that it implied a sidecar injection. So
we stopped running upgrade surveys 6 months ago, but as of 6 months ago, in-place upgrade was still far and away the most popular method of upgrading Istio from one version to the next.
Right. And we do not expect that to change.
Yeah.
With open source.
All right, let's move to the next topic. Thank you so much, Ian, for bringing that up. And Mitch, I think you're up next.
Sorry, I don't have the agenda pulled up. What am I up next on?
CNI integration.
Yeah, so I wanted to refer this over for everybody's attention. We had talked a few weeks ago, well, we've talked several times about the relationship between ztunnel and CNI. Should ztunnel be compatible with CNIs? Should it just be a CNI? And I had a few talks with various CNI projects while we were at KubeCon, including one that has now put out a bit of a proof of concept of how their CNI might be able to work together with ztunnel and be compatible. So this is from Tom at Red Hat. And I just wanted to kind of put it here for you guys to have a look at. And so that we can continue to think about what the relationship between ztunnel and CNIs ought to be. I didn't necessarily want to occupy time. I don't have an opinion to present or a perspective, but it's good to know what the CNI projects think of ztunnel compatibility and what they would like to see.
Tom who from Red Hat again?
Can you say that again?
Who was the person you worked with at Red Hat? Tom?
Let me see here. I think he's probably the creator of the GitHub issue I linked to.
Okay, because I had also started investigating CNI integration with Oven Kubernetes, which is the OpenShift CNI for Ambient. So
okay.
I need to make sure I'm in touch with him.
Let's see here. Yeah, here he is. Tom Schwaller.
It looks like this one is maybe related to Antria, which is a different project from OVN, even though they both use the same OVS as the data plane.
The issue that's being reported here is due to the reliance on VES, right? We have an open issue already in Istio saying that any CNI that does not use VES will not work. That's just a restriction of the current implementation. And if we want to fix that, we have to remove the reliance on VES.
So Antria is actually VMware, not Red Hat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, I think everybody agrees that the current solution and reliance on V is at best Baroque. And we continue to strive to do better. I think there are some faults in flight, but there is nothing working right now.
My intent was just that as we talk about our relationship with CNIs and how ztunnel interacts, we should engage those projects and see how they would like to interact with ztunnel.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to go and survey the major CNIs and say, hey, what would be the best way to enable ztunnel in your environment?
Yeah.
No change for me.
So
other than don't make me do any work.
Right, exactly. That's the best answer.
So on that point, what is the, so like I said, I that's on my list to investigate for Oven Kubernetes, which is what is the CNI we use for OpenShift. Is the plan to have the integrations for different kinds of CNIs in the same master branch of Istio CNI upstream, or will these be out of tree integrations, or what?
I think for user convenience, it would be nice for the UX to not require people to go and get new artifacts, but rather at worst to say what CNI they were trying to be compatible with, and at best for us to figure it out for them, for at least top end common cases.
So you're saying
otherwise the
in-tree support for different CNIs?
Yes, I think so. Like we did that already before a little bit, right? There were some tweaks made to some IP tables rules in the old school sidecar stuff, right, that were a little bit environmentally sensitive. For that reason, right? Because like otherwise the UX is super hard.
Okay. Yeah, I do have some thoughts on the integration with one particular CNI, which if it's appropriate for this meeting, we can discuss in a future call.
Oh yeah, I think it would be 100% appropriate to talk about like getting into the weeds on like what the CNIs do, how they do it, and the best way to integrate is, yes, 100% in scope for this discussion. Please.
Okay.
And I believe your CNI and Justin have a lot in common, so I'm sure he'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, a little history there.
Yeah, so if you want to stick something on the agenda to talk about the OBS-based thing in Red Hat, yeah, please.
Anyhow, that was all I had on the Antrea thing. Just more of an FYI. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
And it looks like we ran a long enough agenda that John and Louis got to duck out of Auth-Z again. Nicely done.
Well, we deliberately. I was working on the document this morning, but it's not ready yet. I'm gonna post turkey.
Before we duck out, I may have already mentioned this, but just heads up, Hyper just released their 1.0, so I'm going to try and upgrade us to that so we can finally not be on release candidate for our most critical library.
Yeah, what is your patch that they haven't taken, John? I'm curious.
Basically, if you use HTTP2, it panics. So it makes it not panic. So what they did was they took some functionality out of the core library and then made the core 1.0. And then they moved it to this other thing, hyperutil. So it's in the hyperutil that's not core and not stable. That has the issue. So that's all. But once they stop that from panicking, then we'll be good to go.
That sounds way better than rapid reset.
Yeah, I think we actually only use it in tests, so it's like not the worst thing in the world. But obviously, we need to have tests. So
okay. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, might take a little while because we have to get all the dependencies updated too, and then like there's all sorts of mess. But
yeah, all right.
You know, we're now there. I think I said last year this time that we're weeks away from them going 1.0. So we should pick it up early. So to see a year later, it's actually happening.
As we wrap, do we have enough people working next Wednesday to justify having a meeting?
No, we already covered that, Mitch.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you were having speaker issues, but everybody put their hand up, or most people did.
Okay, so I will cancel next week's, both of next week's meeting, the work group, Istio work group, and Ambient.
I would assume so.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, Mitch, I did ask in the contributor channel about the earlier one, but I think we
I can hold off on it, Eric. If you just want to ping me when you feel comfortable, I can do it whenever.
Okay. Yeah, I just threw a comment in the contributor channel since we forgot to ask on the call, but
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could go run a poll in Slack and ask for positive acknowledgement if people are going to show up. And
yeah, my guess is nobody will be here.
Yeah.
Sounds good. See everybody in 2 weeks then.
All right. Happy KubeCon recovery week.
Hey, I just want to add a quick note here that there's a proposal for having Istio officers. I've got a link over there. If you want to add comments there, please do.
Thanks, Sanjeev.
Thanks, Sanjeev.
Bye.